The studio lights were bright, almost blinding, and the air inside the hall carried a restless energy. It was one of the most watched talk shows in the country, famous for its ruthless host who built his reputation by mocking celebrities and pushing them into awkward corners. The audience came not just for interviews, but for drama, for the thrill of watching famous faces stumble. Tonight, the seats were full and the cameras were ready to broadcast live across millions of homes. The whispers in the crowd carried one name with excitement and another with doubt: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Both beloved stars, both admired for their humility, but many wondered if they could withstand the fire of this host's sharp tongue. As the theme music ended, the host leaned forward with a smirk that everyone knew well. He lived for confrontation, for the moment when politeness cracked and tempers flared. His eyes scanned the audience, then locked onto the stage entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced dramatically, "tonight we welcome two Hollywood legends. But let's see if they can handle a little honesty." The crowd clapped loudly, some out of respect, others out of curiosity for what might unfold. The doors opened and Keanu and Sandra walked in side by side. Their smiles were soft, almost shy, as if they were walking into a friend's living room, not a hall waiting for conflict. From the very first moment, something about them was disarming. Keanu bowed his head slightly toward the audience, a gesture of quiet respect. Sandra waved warmly, her eyes meeting the faces in the crowd as though she truly saw them. The applause grew louder, but the host wasted no time. "Welcome, welcome," he said, his tone dripping with irony. "I have to admit I wasn't sure you'd come. Maybe you don't mind a little humiliation after all." Laughter rippled through parts of the audience, but many faces tightened with discomfort. The words were sharp, meant to wound, but neither Keanu nor Sandra reacted with anger. Instead, Keanu simply pulled out the chair for Sandra before sitting down himself, a small act of courtesy that made the smirk on the host's face falter for just a second. The host leaned back and crossed his arms. "Keanu, people call you the nicest guy in Hollywood, but tell me honestly, doesn't it get tiring? Or is it just an act for the cameras?" The question was designed like a trap to make him defensive. Keanu looked at the host calmly, his voice steady when he replied. "Kindness isn't tiring," he said softly. "It's harder to be cruel. I don't think people remember the words you say as much as how you make them feel." The hall grew quiet, as if his words carried more weight than expected. Even the laughter that usually followed the host's remarks didn't come. Sandra smiled gently, adding, "Sometimes people confuse kindness with weakness, but I think it takes more strength to stay gentle in a world that keeps testing you." Her tone was calm but firm, and the audience responded with scattered applause that grew louder when Keanu nodded beside her. The host tapped his pen against his desk, clearly unsettled. He wasn't used to his guests disarming his attacks with humility instead of outrage. To regain control, he pushed harder. "Sandra, people say your career survived only because of lucky breaks and roles handed to you. Do you ever feel guilty for taking opportunities others deserved more?" Gasps filled the hall. It was a cruel statement, one that cut deeply. But Sandra didn't flinch. She let the silence stretch for a few seconds, her eyes reflecting both hurt and determination. Then she leaned forward and said, "I've never taken any role for granted. I've worked hard and I've failed many times. But I've also seen young actors give up because no one believed in them. If I've had the chance to continue, it's because people supported me. So instead of guilt, I feel gratitude. And I try to use that gratitude to encourage others who are still waiting for their chance." The audience erupted in applause, this time without hesitation. Some even stood. The host's smirk wavered again. He had expected tears or anger, but instead, Sandra's response turned his question into a lesson. Keanu placed his hand gently on the table, looking at her with quiet admiration. "That's why I've always respected Sandra," he said softly. "She never forgets the people who walk with her, even when the world tells her to only focus on herself." The camera caught the moment, and the silence in the hall was almost heavy. What was meant to humiliate had turned into something powerful, an unexpected display of humility, respect, and resilience. But the host wasn't ready to give up. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer. "So you both think you can turn every insult into a moral speech? Let's see how long that lasts." His words hinted at something bigger, something waiting in the next round of questions. Suspense filled the air, and the audience leaned forward, unsure of what would happen next. The stage was set. The battle of words had only begun. And yet, already, the balance seemed to be shifting, not through anger or loudness, but through calm strength that left the hall silent. The lights in the studio seemed brighter than before, as though the tension in the room was feeding the atmosphere itself. The host leaned back in his chair, pretending to be calm, but his fingers tapped nervously against the desk. He knew something unusual was happening. Normally, by this point in the show, his guests would be flustered, defensive, or even angry. Instead, Keanu and Sandra had turned his sharp questions into moments of quiet power. The audience, who had come expecting entertainment through humiliation, was instead leaning forward with genuine curiosity. They weren't laughing at the host's insults anymore. They were listening to Keanu and Sandra with respect. The host decided to shift strategies. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim authority. "Let's not pretend everything is perfect," he said sharply. "Keanu, you've been called boring, too quiet, even unfit for Hollywood at times. People whisper that your success is only luck. Doesn't it bother you to be seen as less than the charismatic stars around you?" The words cut through the hall, and a murmur spread among the audience. It was an accusation designed to sting, to make Keanu defend himself emotionally. But Keanu did not react in anger. He looked down at his hands for a moment, thoughtful, as if he was considering not the insult, but the humanity behind the question. Then he raised his head slowly and spoke in a voice that carried steady warmth. "I don't mind being quiet," he said. "I don't mind being called simple. Life has taught me that silence often has more truth than noise. Success doesn't come only from charisma. It can come from showing up, from being consistent, from treating people with respect. If people think that is boring, I can live with that." There was a pause. Then a wave of applause swept through the hall. Not polite applause, but genuine, enthusiastic clapping that surprised even the producers. The host shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Keanu's calmness was beginning to turn the audience away from his style of cruelty. Still, he pressed on. "But don't you feel overshadowed? People say you were never the most talented, never the most brilliant actor. Why not admit you were just lucky?" His voice carried a sharp edge. This was his last attempt to provoke. Keanu's eyes softened as though he were remembering something personal. "Luck has been a part of my life, yes," he said slowly. "But so has pain. I've lost people I loved. I've made mistakes. I've been judged unfairly. But through all of that, I learned that humility isn't about denying your worth. It's about never thinking your worth makes you greater than anyone else. If that makes me seem less brilliant to some, I can accept that. What matters is not how bright you shine, but how you make others feel in your light." The words hit the audience with unexpected force. People who had come to laugh were now sitting in silence, reflecting. The host's plan was failing, and he knew it. His smirk was gone, replaced by a tight jaw and narrowed eyes. But Sandra leaned in gently, sensing the shift. "You know," she said softly, "I think people often confuse being loud with being strong. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the heaviest burdens, but they don't show it. That takes more strength than shouting ever could." The crowd erupted into cheers, clapping, and even a few whistles. Sandra's words had landed with force. Cameras caught faces in the audience, some wiping their eyes, others nodding deeply as though her words had touched something hidden inside them. The host slammed his palm on the desk, frustrated. "Fine," he snapped. "Then let's talk about your failures, Sandra. You've had movies that were disasters. Critics have called you overrated. Don't you feel ashamed of those?" His tone was almost cruel, and the audience gasped at the bluntness. Sandra paused, her expression calm, though her eyes reflected a flicker of old wounds. She inhaled slowly, then spoke with honesty. "Yes, I've failed," she admitted. "I've had projects that didn't work. I've been rejected, laughed at, and told I wasn't good enough. But failure doesn't mean you stop trying. Every mistake taught me something. Every rejection reminded me that I was human, and that being human means falling sometimes. I don't feel ashamed of failing. I would feel ashamed only if I stopped getting back up." Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness but from sincerity. The hall filled with a hush so deep that the sound of someone clearing their throat in the back row echoed loudly. Then applause thundered once more, stronger than before, rising like a wave that carried her words beyond the stage. Sandra smiled, not in triumph, but in gratitude. She glanced at Keanu, who nodded quietly, his eyes showing respect. For the first time in his career, the host felt the ground slipping from beneath him. The very tools he had used for years, mockery, humiliation, provocation, were failing him. Worse, the audience wasn't on his side anymore. He tried to recover by laughing, forcing out a chuckle. "You two are good at speeches," he sneered. "But let's see how you handle something real. Let's see how you deal when the past comes back to confront you." The word sent a ripple of suspense across the studio. The audience leaned in closer. What did he mean? What was he planning? Cameras zoomed tighter on Keanu and Sandra. Their calmness remained, but beneath the surface, both of them sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. The host snapped his fingers toward the backstage curtain. "Bring them out," he ordered. The crowd gasped, turning their heads. Shadows moved behind the curtain. Suspense thickened the air, every second stretching longer than it should. Who was about to walk onto that stage? And what truth would they bring with them? The curtain shifted slowly, almost painfully, as though the suspense itself had weight. The audience leaned forward in their seats, breaths shallow, hearts pounding. The host's smirk returned, faint but dangerous, as if he knew he was about to deliver a blow that even Keanu and Sandra couldn't soften with their humility. His voice rang with false confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we don't just have words. We have witnesses, people who will show you the truth behind these Hollywood legends." Out of the shadows, two figures emerged. The first was a man in his late 50s, his face worn with bitterness. The second was a younger woman, perhaps in her 30s, carrying herself with a mix of nerves and determination. The crowd erupted with whispers, some recognizing them immediately. The older man was a former director known for his harsh criticisms. The woman was an actress who once auditioned alongside Sandra and had spoken publicly about losing a role she believed was rigged. The host spread his arms wide, savoring the moment. "Ah, here they are. People who know the real Keanu and the real Sandra. Let's see if your kindness speeches survive a little reality." He gestured for the newcomers to sit on the opposite side of the stage, deliberately creating a visual of confrontation. The director leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp. "Keanu may be everyone's favorite nice guy now, but I remember a time when he wasn't professional at all. He walked away from a project I was working on, left everyone stranded. People praised him, but behind the scenes he was selfish. Hollywood doesn't tell you that part." The words were like poison, crafted to cut through the respect the audience felt. Gasps spread through the hall. Keanu didn't move at first. He sat still, hands folded on the table, his expression unreadable. But then he lifted his gaze and his eyes carried a weight that silenced even the whispers. "I remember that project," he said quietly. "And I remember walking away. But not because I wanted to hurt anyone. I left because the conditions on set were unsafe. One of the crew had been injured and I couldn't ignore it. I made the choice to step away until it was addressed. Maybe some saw that as selfish. But I'd rather be called selfish than watch someone get hurt just so I could keep my role." The audience shifted. Murmurs turned into nods and a few claps broke out. The host tried to wave it down, but the truth in Keanu's tone was undeniable. The director's jaw tightened, his argument suddenly weaker in the face of such honesty. Before the tension could fade, the young woman leaned forward. Her voice trembled but carried resentment. "Sandra, do you remember me? Years ago, we auditioned for the same role. You got it, and I didn't. I was told later that you only got it because you already had connections. You took an opportunity that could have changed my life." Her words cut into the hall and the silence was sharp. Sandra's face softened, not with defensiveness, but with empathy. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice tender but firm. "Yes, I remember that audition. And I remember you too. You were talented, very talented. I didn't choose that role. The studio made their decision. I can't change what happened, but I can tell you this. I never saw acting as a competition against you. I saw it as a way for both of us to tell stories that matter. I'm sorry you felt it was taken from you, and if I could go back, I would have fought for you to be noticed too." Her honesty hit the room with unexpected force. Instead of anger, she offered regret. Instead of excuses, she offered compassion. The young woman's lips trembled. She had come prepared to fight, but Sandra's words broke through her bitterness. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I just wanted someone to acknowledge what it felt like." Sandra reached across the table, placing her hand gently on the woman's. "I see you," she said softly, "and I acknowledge it. Your pain matters." The audience erupted in thunderous applause, some standing, some clapping with tears in their eyes. The host's plan to create drama had backfired spectacularly. What was supposed to humiliate had transformed into a moment of deep connection. But the host wasn't ready to surrender. His voice rose above the applause, sharp and impatient. "So what? You're good at speeches, both of you. But let's be honest. How long can you pretend to be saints? Don't you ever lose your temper? Don't you ever feel hate? Because if you don't, maybe you're not even human." His words were designed to corner them, to suggest that kindness was nothing more than a performance. Keanu's eyes glistened with something deeper now. "Of course I feel anger," he admitted. "Of course I've felt hate. I'm human like everyone else. But the choice is not whether those feelings exist, it's whether we let them control us. I have felt hate, but I never want to let it define me. Kindness isn't the absence of darkness. It's choosing to carry light even when darkness is heavy." The audience sat frozen, gripped by every word. Sandra added, her voice steady, "And sometimes the hardest battles are the ones people never see. The quiet struggles, the private tears, the mistakes we carry in silence. We don't stand here as perfect people. We stand here as people who keep choosing respect even when it would be easier to throw it away." The hall roared with applause, the sound so powerful that the cameras shook slightly as they captured the moment. People weren't just watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing something human, something raw. The host clenched his jaw, realizing he was losing control. But then, with a sly smile, he leaned into his microphone and said, "If you really believe in all this, then let's put it to the test, because I've prepared something that will expose the truth about you both." His words carried menace, and the audience froze again, pulled back into suspense. What could he mean? What test had he planned? The cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every flicker of expression on Keanu and Sandra's faces. Both remained calm, but deep in their eyes, there was the quiet understanding that the next moment could change everything. The host leaned forward, his eyes glittering with the hunger of someone who thought he had finally found a weapon sharp enough to pierce through humility. The audience, now hanging on every beat, went silent as though the entire hall was holding its breath. "Everyone talks about kindness," the host said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "But kindness, humility, and respect mean nothing if they collapse under pressure. So tonight we're going to see how much pressure these two can really take." His words felt like a warning, and even those in the audience who had once laughed at his cruelty now shifted uneasily. A stagehand walked forward carrying 2 large envelopes. The host held them high for the cameras to see. "Inside these," he said dramatically, "are personal stories, accusations, and details that have never been shared with the public. Truths that might not be so flattering." He handed one to Sandra and one to Keanu. "You say you can face anything with kindness? Then let's see you face this. Open them, right here, right now." The tension in the room spiked. The audience whispered nervously, unsure whether they wanted to witness admiration turning into scandal. The camera zoomed in on Sandra's hands as she carefully opened her envelope. Inside was a printed statement from a critic, years old, accusing her of being fake with fans, saying she smiled for cameras but didn't care once they were turned off. It was a harsh, cold accusation. The host grinned. "Go on, Sandra. Tell us if this isn't true. Or will you admit that maybe you're not so genuine after all?" Sandra inhaled deeply, her fingers resting lightly on the paper. She didn't rush her response. She looked out into the audience, her eyes steady and warm. "There have been times," she said softly, "when I was tired, or when I carried pain that nobody else could see. Maybe someone caught me in a moment where I couldn't smile as wide as they hoped, and maybe that left them feeling I didn't care. If that happened, I'm truly sorry. But I never stopped caring. Fans aren't just fans to me. They're people, with stories and struggles of their own. If I failed anyone in showing that, I don't make excuses. I only say this. I try my best. And when I fall short, I try harder the next time. Her honesty was raw, not defensive. Instead of denying, she admitted her humanity. The audience broke into applause, louder and longer than before, their respect deepening with every word. Even the young actress from earlier wiped her eyes, visibly moved. The host, visibly unsettled, snapped his attention to Keanu. "Your turn. Let's see if you can dance around this one." Keanu opened his envelope slowly. Inside was an old tabloid clipping accusing him of being cold on a set years ago, suggesting he isolated himself and refused to engage with others. The host leaned closer. "So, Mr. Nice Guy, was it all an act? Or were you just too good to talk to people who worked beside you?" Keanu held the clipping for a moment, then set it gently on the table. His voice was calm, steady, almost quiet, yet every ear in the hall strained to hear him. "I know the story this came from," he said. "There was a time when I was grieving. I had lost someone close to me, and I didn't know how to share that pain with the people around me. I wasn't cold because I didn't care. I was distant because I was broken. But even in that time, I tried to respect everyone I worked with. Maybe I wasn't smiling, maybe I wasn't talking much, but I never stopped being grateful for every person on set. If people misunderstood that silence, I understand why. But silence, too, has its reasons." A hush fell over the hall. The weight of his vulnerability pressed into the audience's hearts. No laughter, no whispers, just silence, as if his grief had reached every person in the room. Then applause began, soft at first, then rising like thunder. People weren't just clapping for his words. They were clapping for his honesty, his willingness to admit pain without shame. The host slammed his hand on the desk in frustration. "So that's it?" he barked. "You turn every flaw into some kind of noble story? Do you ever take responsibility? Or do you just polish your failures into pearls of wisdom?" His words were sharp, dripping with venom. Keanu looked at him, not with anger, but with a gentle sadness. "Taking responsibility isn't about burying yourself in guilt," he said. "It's about learning. Every mistake, every misunderstanding, is a chance to be better. I've never claimed to be perfect, but I'll never stop trying to grow, and that's what responsibility looks like to me." The audience broke into cheers again, louder this time, the sound filling every corner of the studio. The host's face darkened. He was losing control of the show, and everyone could see it. His cruelty was being dismantled, not with counterattacks, but with calm truth. But then, with a sly smile, he leaned back in his chair. "You think you've won," he said. "But I've saved the real test for last. If kindness is so powerful, let's see if it can survive betrayal." His words sent a shockwave of suspense through the crowd. Betrayal? What did he mean? Who could he possibly bring out now? He turned toward the curtain once again, snapping his fingers. "Bring them in," he commanded. The audience gasped as more shadows moved behind the stage. There was a buzz of whispers, a wave of curiosity mixed with dread. Sandra's eyes narrowed and Keanu's posture straightened slightly. Whatever was coming next was not just another envelope or another accusation. It was something heavier, something personal. The lights dimmed slightly and the curtain began to rise. Every heart in the hall beat faster, waiting for the reveal. The curtain lifted slowly, as though time itself wanted to stretch the suspense. The audience held their breath, waiting for the promised betrayal that the host had teased with such venom. Two figures stepped forward, and the crowd gasped. One was a former co-star who had once worked with Sandra during the early days of her career. The other was a man who had known Keanu during his youth, long before Hollywood ever called his name. Their faces carried tension, as if they had been waiting years for this moment. The host leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin, his voice rising like a drum beat before a storm. "You see," he announced to the crowd, "kindness is easy when everyone praises you. But when someone you trusted turns against you, when someone you thought was on your side speaks the truth, that's when masks fall away. Tonight, let's see what happens when your past refuses to stay hidden." The co-star spoke first, her voice sharp and trembling. "Sandra, do you remember the film we worked on together? You were already becoming famous. I was just a supporting role, invisible to most. But I remember you ignoring me, laughing with the directors while I stood alone. You made me feel like I didn't matter." Her words cut deep, and the audience shifted uneasily. Sandra turned to her, her face pale but calm. She took a long breath, her voice quiet yet clear. "I do remember that set," she said. "And I remember being so overwhelmed with pressure that I sometimes forgot the people around me were carrying their own struggles. If I ever made you feel invisible, I am truly sorry. It was never my intention. I should have done more to notice you, to include you, to show you respect. I failed in that moment. But I can tell you honestly, you did matter. You still do. I just didn't show it the way I should have." The hall went silent. The co-star blinked, her anger wavering under the weight of Sandra's honesty. She had expected denial, excuses, maybe even a defensive outburst. Instead, she was met with humility and regret that felt undeniably real. The audience broke into soft applause, some even standing. The woman's lips trembled as though she wanted to hold on to her bitterness, but Sandra's sincerity cracked it open. The host quickly turned to the man standing near Keanu, eager to keep the attack going. "And you," he said sharply, "tell them what you told me. Let's see if the world still calls Keanu Reeves a saint after this." The man's voice carried a mixture of pain and accusation. "Keanu and I grew up together. Back then we dreamed of making it big. I supported him, encouraged him, even shared my ideas with him. But when Hollywood finally noticed him, he disappeared. He left me behind. He forgot the friend who stood by him when no one else believed in him." The words echoed in the studio like a thunderclap. Betrayal, abandonment, the kind of accusation that could split. Admiration wide open. The audience gasped, their eyes fixed on Keanu. For a moment he was silent. His head bowed slightly, and his expression carried the weight of memory. Then slowly, he raised his eyes and met the man's gaze. "You're right," Keanu said softly. The hall froze in shock. He wasn't denying it. "There was a time when I lost touch with you. I was swept into a world I didn't know how to handle. Hollywood gave me opportunities, but it also took me away from the people who mattered. I should have stayed connected. I should have remembered more. For that, I'm sorry. I didn't forget you in my heart, but I failed to show it in my actions." The man faltered, his anger clashing with unexpected vulnerability. Keanu's voice grew steadier, carrying through the silence. "But I never stopped being grateful. Those dreams we shared, they carried me forward. I wouldn't be here without those early days, without you standing beside me. Maybe I couldn't return the support the way you deserved, but I never betrayed what you meant to me." The hall erupted, but not with laughter or mockery. The applause was thunderous, powerful, and emotional. People stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. They had expected scandal and disgrace, but what they witnessed instead was a man facing his flaws with humility, choosing honesty over defense and respect over pride. The host slammed his hands on the desk, his face red with frustration. "So this is it?" he shouted. "Every accusation just becomes another story about how humble you are. Don't you see, audience? They're spinning everything. No one can be this perfect." But before he could continue, something unexpected happened. The co-star who had accused Sandra leaned forward, her voice breaking. "I came here to expose her. I thought I would feel relief. But the truth is, I see now she wasn't my enemy. My pain blinded me. Her words tonight, they healed something in me." She turned towards Sandra, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you for acknowledging me." Then the man beside Keanu lowered his head, his voice trembling. "I thought he abandoned me. I carried that bitterness for years. But hearing him admit his mistake, hearing him honor what we had, I can't hate him anymore." The audience gasped again, this time from the twist they hadn't seen coming. Instead of betrayal destroying Keanu and Sandra, it turned into reconciliation, a moment where old wounds found light. The host's smirk was gone. For the first time, he looked small, overshadowed by the very people he had tried to humiliate. His show had been built on cruelty, but kindness was winning, transforming every attack into something beautiful. But then, his eyes darkened. He leaned forward with one final dangerous smile. "You think this is over? No! The real test hasn't even begun. You've faced accusations, you've faced betrayal, but what happens when I put you against each other? The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Whispers shot through the hall. Against each other. What did he mean? Sandra turned toward Keanu, her brow furrowed, and Keanu looked back at her with calm steadiness. The bond between them was unspoken, but now it was about to be tested in front of the entire world. The studio air grew heavier, the tension almost unbearable. The host leaned forward, his voice sharp and cruel. Everyone thinks you two are some kind of untouchable pair, symbols of humility, of kindness, of respect. But let's see what happens when that bond is tested. Let's see if you stay united when the world demands you turn against each other. The audience gasped. Cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of concern in Sandra's eyes and the calm, steady expression on Keanu's face. The host snapped his fingers, and a giant screen lowered behind them. "We asked the audience to vote," he announced, "on who between you has contributed more to Hollywood. The results are ready. Only one of you will be praised tonight. The other will be branded as less important, less valuable. Let's see if your kindness survives that." A hush swept the hall. Sandra's breath caught in her throat, but Keanu gently placed a hand on the table, steady and reassuring. "Whatever it says," he whispered softly enough for the microphones to catch, "it doesn't change who you are." The screen lit up. The poll results appeared in giant numbers. Keanu had received the majority of votes. Sandra's name was far behind. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people clapped, others shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the explosion of tension the host had promised. The host smirked triumphantly. "There it is. Keanu Reeves, the favorite. Sandra, how does it feel to know the world values him more than you? And Keanu, how does it feel to watch your friend left in the shadows?" For a long moment, the hall was silent. Sandra's eyes glistened, not with anger, but with the weight of old insecurities the question had ripped open. She leaned toward her microphone, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't need to be the favorite," she said. "I've never done this work to win polls or prove I'm more valuable than someone else. Keanu deserves every bit of love the world gives him. I feel honored just to walk beside him, not compete with him." The audience broke into applause, loud and heartfelt. But before it could fade, Keanu leaned forward, his calm voice carrying like a wave across the room. "No," he said firmly. "I don't accept this game. Sandra Bullock is not less valuable. She has given the world strength, hope, and heart through her work and through her kindness. I wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for her encouragement years ago. The truth is, she has always been the light in every room I've entered." The hall erupted, people clapping and cheering, some even standing on their feet. Sandra looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. Keanu smiled at her gently, a look of pure respect. The host slammed his fist on the desk, his voice desperate now. "Stop turning everything into a speech. This show is about exposing people, not worshiping them. Don't you see? The world doesn't need fake kindness. It needs reality." Keanu turned to him slowly, his gaze steady. "Kindness is reality," he said. "Cruelty might get attention, but kindness changes people. You thought tonight was about humiliating us, but it was never about us. It's about everyone watching. Because everyone here knows what it feels like to be judged, to be mocked, to be torn down. If we can show that humility and respect are stronger than insults, then maybe we remind people of their own strength." The audience roared with applause louder than ever before. It wasn't just clapping. It was shouting, cheering, people rising to their feet in unity. The host's face paled. His smirk was gone. The show was no longer his. Sandra reached out and took Keanu's hand gently, raising it in the air. "This isn't about who's better," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is about reminding the world that we're better when we stand together." The entire hall stood, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The cameras captured the moment, Keanu and Sandra side by side, not broken by humiliation, but lifted higher by respect and kindness. The host, realizing his defeat, slumped back in his chair. His empire of cruelty had crumbled in a single night, undone not by anger or shouting, but by humility, truth, and resilience. As the show ended, the audience continued cheering. Viewers across the world watched in awe. Social media flooded with clips of Keanu and Sandra's words. People weren't talking about the host anymore. They were talking about the power of kindness in a world starved for it. Backstage, away from the lights, Sandra turned to Keanu with a soft smile. "You know," she said, "we didn't just survive tonight. We showed something bigger." Keanu nodded, his voice quiet but strong. "We showed that no insult, no cruelty can silence respect." And with that, they walked out of the studio together, leaving behind a hall that had fallen silent, not in shame, but in reverence.